But if by some extraordinary miracle we gain the entire planet and seize power, I think it would still be necessary to surrender. But don't do that until we're sure that having won the revolution once, we can surrender and still win it again and again and again. So communism in motion would be the future, under the sun, but especially under the moon.
Het is zondag 11 november en dit is Linkse Hobby's, podcast van Authentiek Links. Vandaag hebben we het dubbelinterview met antropologen Camilla Power en Chris Knight. Ook hier is het interview weer gepaard met een lezing van Camilla op de Communistische University. Deze kun je weer terugvinden op onze website. Je vraagt je af wat antropologie met socialistische politiek te maken heeft? Luister vooral verder, want het antwoord is alles. Camilla Power is a senior lecturer at the anthropology department at the University of East London. Can you tell us more about yourself?
Okay. I'm a member of the radical anthropology group, which has really tried to combine drawing on understanding of anthropology and activism, and directed by a kind of worldview from anthropology, if you like. So that would be anarcho-communist, both ways, really. And I'm particularly fieldwork has been done with hunter-gatherers, the Hadza hunter-gatherers in Tanzania. So I have some experience and have some education with hunter-gatherers on the reality, the practical aspects of egalitarianism.
So you have done some fieldwork in Tanzania. What kind of fieldwork has that been?
Okay, well, that's fieldwork, social anthropology fieldwork, really, with hunter-gatherers, but primarily it's focused on women and women's culture. The Hadza are a group who live in the Tanzanian Rift Valley, and they are very much taken as the model for human evolution. They are regarded as kind of this special group that can teach us so many things about human evolution. And they've taught us, for instance, about the grandmother hypothesis, grandmother theory, a lot about big game hunting and how hunting and the resources are shared, and about egalitarianism. But there hasn't been, and what we wanted to do with our research was there hasn't been a real focus on women's culture, their ritual, their songs. So this I felt was very important. So that was something that I really wanted to do.
All right. So you have been into anthropology for quite some time. You characterize yourself as an anarcho-communist, I believe.
Anarcho-communist.
Right. So, what pulled you into both anthropology and at Marxism or anarcho-communism? Are these two linked at all? What could you tell us about that?
Okay, so really my political education was through feminism, but it was feminism and Marxism combined, and it was through Engels. Engels' Origins of Society was private property in the Origins of the Family, private property in the state, was my first starting point to get into Marxist literature, after which I started others of the kind of classics. But the reconciliation of feminism and Marxism was always of enormous importance for me. And that's how I came to anthropology, because anthropology puts at its heart issues of gender and kinship. So the question of, well, how is women's oppression a natural phenomena that it just is always going to be there because there's always going to be male dominance? Or, as Engels, with, remarkable foresight and remarkable, astonishing drawing from anthropology, from Lewis Henry Morgan's work, argued that women's oppression is a recent historical phenomenon. Now, the only people who can really teach us about this are hunter-gatherers. What do we find in terms of gender amongst hunter-gatherers? Now, why I say anarcho-communist is that hunter-gatherers really, you cannot call them just communist and you cannot call them just anarchist. They do not have leaders. They are, classically anarchist. They're doing everything with nobody in charge. And yet they are profoundly collective and profoundly communist. The equal sharing of resources is an ideology that is just pervasive and persistent and is at their core of their identity. So my model of anarcho-communism comes from my experience with hunter-gatherers. And it's very hard for me. Hunter-gatherers themselves have this tension between the autonomy of the individual, a kind of classic anarchist position, and the collective requiring people to join in and work together. So these were some of the very significant problems in our evolution. And hunter-gatherers are showing us every day in their practical experience how they solved these problems.
And more on that later on. So we also are here joined with Professor Chris Knight from the Department of Anthropology, University College London. So Chris, what can you tell the listeners about yourself?
Well, most of my life, or at least until I was, I think, about in my 40s, I was an unemployable person, except that I was a post office van driver and various other jobs, supply teacher and stuff, because I had a theory, and it was a very unusual theory, and it really meant that I couldn't get a job in a university because the theory was not kind of recognized, and it came from the idea that human evolution was a process which was gradual, but at the point when language, culture, symbolism, and distinctively human consciousness emerged, it was relatively sudden. It was a revolution. So I've quite a long time ago. I became a Marxist in, I think, sometime, I don't know, 62, 63. I'm getting on a bit. I'm 75. So I was at Sussex University in the early 60s, and we were one of the so-called red bases. And anybody who was at all active politically really was gravitating towards Trotskyism or anarchism, in a very small number of cases where I was, maybe Maoism, but I didn't really know any Maoists. And it just seemed to me that it was, in addition to being active and in addition to reading Marx and Engels and attempting to apply Marxist theory to our activism, it seemed to me important to follow the example of Marx and Engels in being up to date with our science. And I couldn't understand why all my friends and colleagues, when they talked about Marxism, they always seemed to think what you have to do, you have to go back 100 years and read a few texts. And I just thought, well, of course you have to read the text, but I don't remember Marx or Engels telling us that they went back a few hundred years. I mean, they Marx and Engels both kept abreast of the most up-to-date economic theory and other, and philosophy, and in Marx and Engels' case, anthropology, because they regarded the crucial thing to do was to base your politics on science. Science is constantly undergoing change. Science isn't something which stays still. Scientists have to be questioning, and no theory can remain sort of fossilized and still be, up to scratch. So anyway, my view was that Marx and Engels were both anthropologists. They were both, in essence, exploring what it means to be human. And I don't just mean Engels. I mean Marx himself. All of Marx's early writings were essentially anthropological writings based on Feuerbach, of course, and other thinkers. And it just seemed to me, before I discovered anthropology as a discipline, which took a while, it seemed to me evident that we needed to apply Marxist methodology to problems which face us today. I don't know how to say it really more than that. That sort of captures it. I could go on and on about why I got interested in the family, particularly. I'm sure it's something to do with me, as so many people. Most of us, I think, we grow up as teenagers and we think, about our parents. We love the parents and we're grateful for all that they did for us. But I think most of us, and certainly I thought there must be a better way of bringing up kids. There must be a better way of organising family life than the way my parents managed. And so it seemed to me, it seemed to me at an early stage in my teens that it cannot be the case that the family has been as kind of isolated and cut off as my family was from other families, from wider communities. And I soon discovered that actually the modern nuclear family is a very strangely isolated and kind of relatively recent invention. And when I was in Sussex University with my comrades, when we used to read the classic Marxist text, just like Camilla, is when I discovered Engels' book. I think that must have been 1963 or 4. The Origin of the Family, Private Property in the State. That was an absolute revelation to me, and it was reading that made me feel, right, this is where it's at. This kind of, I knew it wasn't up to date. I knew that we needed to check it out and check out whether Engels' theories still worked in the light of today's knowledge of human evolution and archaeology and anthropology. But it seemed to me those were the vital issues, and it was just inconceivable that Engels himself would have just left things there, just he would have continually revised and updated his work in the light of modern knowledge. And I just couldn't understand why nobody else seemed to be doing that. And even the Marxists who were interested in that, they simply went back to, they either rejected Engels on the basis that it was out of date, or they treated it as scripture. And neither of those things seem to be at all intelligent, or anywhere near what Engels or Marx themselves would have recommended.
Maybe that's a good way to start this conversation, as, anthropology is quite important, but why should communists in 2018 care about anthropology at all?
Anthropology is the science that kind of contains all the other social sciences. It should be, anyway, ultimately materialist and to some degree empiricist through its quintessential experience of fieldwork, which gives the voice to the people who are being studied, or subjects, if you like. But there's such a intersubjectivity in anthropology. Anthropology is the whole history of anthropology, and all that's been done in anthropology provides the most remarkable record of all the ways there are of being human. And as Marxists coming out of a very specific European industrial historic experience, where Europe has, of course, gallivanted all over the world, oppressing, colonizing, massacring, causing genocide. I mean, actually, it's only through an experience of anthropology that we can kind of turn our minds inside out and start to understand human experience from other perspectives. And so David Graeber, the notable anarchist anthropologist, has tried to align anthropology with the as a practice that goes along with anarchism very strongly. But I don't accept necessarily his attacks on Marxism, because as Chris just said, Marx and Engels were very much reaching for. They were discovering, and also after Marx and Engels, Rosa Luxemburg, we know from her recent published notebooks about how they were reaching for. We cannot understand our human society and all the consequences of the development of the state and so forth without also understanding the history of pre-state societies and where did these developments come from. We can't just accept human history as a product of state organization. There is so much of human history and what made us human coming from before that. So to understand ourselves fully, bodies, minds, hearts and souls, we just need anthropology.
But one of these arguments we keep hearing over and over and over again is, well, communism can't work because, well, it's against human nature, right? Or...
Yeah, well, that is the deepest argument against the program of revolutionary change and socialism, is that no revolution. You hear this so often. No revolution can change human nature. I've heard this on the doorstep. Or I've heard it just it's just so deep rooted that male dominance, possessiveness, jealousy, aggression. All these things are part of human nature because we're primates. We're our relatives are the monkeys and apes, and they are not particularly communist. Chimpanzees are not in any way communist. They live in what we would definitely regard as quite despotic social systems, riven with sexual and other forms of conflict, and with quite a hierarchical, social structure. With males, with common chimps I'm talking about now, males are dominant over females, and some males are dominant over others. And we would find life in such a society absolutely intolerable. So how can we argue for the revolutionary change? How can we argue that revolution might work? Well, there's only one possible argument, and that's that everything which characterizes us as a distinctively human species, everything distinctive about human nature, the fact that we can speak and we have actual genetic dispositions to acquire the grammar of a language. Every child has, a kind of brain, if you like, almost designed to acquire this complex theoretical structure, the grammar of its natal language. The fact that we have that, the fact that we can see ourselves as others see us, the fact that we can join together in establishing collective rules, all these things which mark us off from the other primates, are actually the products of the greatest revolution in history, the human revolution. We became human in a revolution, and there really is no other explanation. I mean, just tell me, is there any theory as to how we became human? I mean, there are theories, of course, which simply say we were apes and we're still apes, but those theories just don't work. They don't explain religion, they don't explain art, they don't explain language. And so for me, the discovery of the human revolution, and I need to stress, by the way, that the idea of the human revolution is not my idea, and it's not even a Marxist idea. The idea of the human revolution has been around a very long time among archaeologists, paleontologists, and anthropologists. I'm not saying there aren't disputes, there aren't debates, and so on, but the idea that some kind of social revolution was responsible for the final stages of human evolution is very much part of the mainstream in anthropology and archaeology. Debates about, how gradual this revolution or how sudden it was, of course, but the idea that some kind of revolution was part of the process is very much, part of mainstream thinking, and that means that surely we should explore that revolution, because the finding that, the way I see it is this: is that those who doubt whether communism is possible, first of all, why not study people who to this day live by hunting and gathering and are emphatically communist? And then secondly, why not find out a little bit more about the only revolution which worked? We know that the human revolution worked because here we are. We've got language, we've got consciousness, we've got the ability to construct rules of moral rules to organise society. We're not very good at it these days. Capitalism is, it's definitely messed up. But the fact that we won that revolution, and here we are as humans with these very unusual capacities, proves that that revolution can work. We did it once, and we can do it again.
All right. So I do believe that the scientific community doesn't really use the word revolution, but more a punctuated equilibrium, and instead of original communism, they would use hunter-gatherer societies.
Sharing way of life.
Something apolitical, at least.
Not all anthropologists. The particularly hunter-gatherer anthropologists, such as Richard Lee, would openly describe primitive communism and defend it, with his old colleague Eleanor Laycock, who was one of the most notable anthropologists to defend Engels in essence. And also people like James Woodburn and his students like Jerome Lewis will absolutely defend the political aspect of hunter-gatherers as egalitarian civilizations, with the idea that there is an ideology, an ideological attachment to equality, sharing, and that it is the vital organizing feature of the societies. So whether they call it communist or not, they try obviously to reach for the hunter-gatherer society's own concepts for describing themselves, but essentially they're certainly much closer to communist than they are to capitalist, that's for sure.
Right, and reflecting back on society today, Camilla, you've talked in your session about the fact that capitalist society preys on human psychology being communist. Could you perhaps elaborate on that?
Okay, so I'm borrowing a bit of David Graeber's arguments there, because he's made this point, and I've heard him make this point, and I completely agree with him. But Graeber doesn't deal in evolution, which I do. And I'm really drawing from the work by people like Michael Tomasello and Sarah Hrdy with her great book called Mothers and Others, which traces the evolution of our what's known as intersubjectivity. And we can just see this with our eyes, our so-called cooperative eyes. We have eyes. Chris was just contrasting hunter-gatherer society to chimpanzees. Well, we humans, all of us, have eyes which are the exact opposite, a different design from all the other more than 200 primate species. So something different happened to us in our ancestry. So our eyes have a long almond shape, and they have a white background so that it makes clear that our iris, what is our eye direction? What are we interested in? And this shows to anyone that we're in social interaction with, this can be pre-linguistic. We don't have to be linguistic here. This is body language, which is pre-linguistic, which is making manifest to the other person we're in that interaction with what is our mental state, what are our emotional, what are our feelings. And this is the basis for mutual mind reading. Okay. So all of this is suggesting we went through from a deep time, from more than 1 million years ago, a phase of prolonged and an increasing egalitarianism and cooperative, hypersocial cooperativeness. I mean, that's another word that the rather bourgeois scientists might use, hypersocial or pro-social instead of saying communist. But even if it was in kind of clusters and groupings, people had a kind of equality of status and were dealing with each other in a horizontal aspect. And it's through, and capitalism, when we work for capitalist profiteering ruling classes who are extracting the profits from our labor, we are working in these cooperative clusters, helping each other with our instincts to help each other. And that is how capitalism preys and parasitizes on our human nature, our psychology and evolved capacities.
All right. So you were saying that these features already existed more than a million years ago in our ancestors then. So we aren't the first hominids to show these characteristics. What kind of evidence do we have for that?
Okay. Well, to actually, this is a complicated argument. To actually demonstrate, the main aspect of evidence is the size of the brains in the fossil record. Now, when it comes to chimpanzees, great apes, orangutans, gorillas, chimps, bonobos, and to Australopithecines, which were like bipedal apes prior to the evolution of genus Homo. So basically up to 2 million years ago. All of them have a brain size under what's called a gray ceiling. 600 cc is roughly it. And that is a gray ceiling. What is constraining there is the amount of energy that a mother has for raising a child of a certain brain size. So the energy is constrained by how much energy can the mother give to the child. And she's doing it. A chimpanzee mother is doing this completely by herself. So what changed for us, and it must have changed with the onset of basically Homo erectus, the evolution of that species. And we know this because of the large brain size of that species by about 1.5 million years ago. What changed for us was, this is Sarah Hrdy's Mothers and Others. We started to be able, we were able to babysit each other. So mothers could leave their child with some other, which in the first place must have been grandmother, essentially the mother's mother, as the most trusted relative. And what this did, Soheli's argument is that it created these selection pressures of intersubjectivity, of wanting to read each other's minds, and being willing to allow our minds to be read. A chimpanzee or another primate, they have these round, dark eyes because they want to know what others are thinking, but they don't want others to know what they're thinking. Their intelligence is what's known as Machiavellian, whereas ours is intersubjective. And this makes all the difference in terms of cooperation. So we know from brain sizes that this is happening already. Homo erectus would have started to have grandmothering, would have started to have the evolution of cooperative eyes, was starting to have these larger brain sizes. And so changes in life history, the length of lifespan, the length of childhood, the length of being a grandmother, menopause, the evolution of menopause. Menopause itself is a piece of the evidence. The size of brains, these are the sorts of evidence that we're talking about that tell us we began to be egalitarian over a long time period. But in the last 500,000 years, this has shifted in another order. So Homo erectus was like 2 times chimpanzee brain size. But in the last 500,000 years, this becomes 3 times a chimpanzee brain size, and it still accelerates. Now, that is just extraordinary. There isn't another case history in the whole animal kingdom, certainly not amongst social mammals. And just think of mammals, females do all the work with mammals of the raising of a young infant. So somehow the mothers of our ancestors, as we evolved towards Homo sapiens in Africa, the mothers of our ancestors were getting enormous amounts of extra energy. And where that was coming from, well, fundamentally, that was coming from the leisured sex, who are males, because males don't have to do very much work at all to become, to get offspring, compared to females. Somehow females were getting an enormous amount of energy, extra energy from males. And this is the nub of the social and sexual revolution. Females worked together in cooperatives and coalitions to get males to cooperate. Female solidarity was the primary basis for male solidarity and that was the basis for our solidarity in human evolution.
All right. So Machiavelli is a sort of prophet of the monkeys, or the other apes, at least. So Camilla already talked about the eyes being very different with their pigmentation. What are other differences regarding humans and chimpanzees or other big apes?
Well, there are very profound differences in sexual anatomy and sexual physiology. And they're especially evident in the female. I mean, the human male has got the roughly same sort of penis and testicles, I suppose, as other primates, although, rather different. You can work out from testicle size roughly how promiscuous or monogamous a primate is. Very large testicles mean lots of sperm. Chimpanzees have got very big testicles. Baboon males tend to have very small testicles. I don't know if you want me to explain all this in your program as to why it is that the human male seems to have sort of intermediate-sized testicles. But I'm just saying, biological scientists, evolutionary scientists, see these features of sexual anatomy as indications of evolutionarily stable sexual, or if you like, mating strategies. So I'd rather talk about the female because that's more profound change. So I mean, obviously I have to be really, really simplify in a way, but in a very important sense for non-human primates, when you're talking about sex, the name of the game is to save time. So with a male baboon, he will do best in getting his genes into the future if he manages to save time on sex. So have sex with one female at the right time when she's likely to get pregnant, and then quickly move to the next female, and then the next, and don't hang around, don't waste time. And if the female doesn't need more time from the male than she needs just to get a bit of sperm and get herself pregnant, it pays her to save time on sex. And she does that by giving to the male the time-saving information. So her body, it signals to the male, this is the right time to have sex with me. So it might be a swelling, it might be a smell, it might be a bit of behavior.
It is quite externally visible.
It's externally visible in some form, or maybe it's olfaction, or maybe it's smell or something, or maybe it's behavior. It doesn't have to be a big swelling. But now, as soon as you start talking about saving time on sex, and you think about humans, and you think, right, is that one of our major preoccupations, is to make sure we're saving time on sex? You immediately realize, I mean, it's true that some, religious people, I mean, the Pope might say that it's important only to have sex if you're going to make a baby, otherwise it's a sin. But as soon as you think about it, we're very badly designed to be good in that sense. The human male, we have, I mean, for example, copulation with humans, it may be, sometimes it may be rather sadly quick, but I mean, it's going to be like 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 10 minutes, half an hour. With the chimpanzees, it's all over in a few seconds. And with most primates, it's all over in a few seconds. So saving time on sex is not what we do. And in fact, the human female is actually designed, if you like, again, using the language of saving time or wasting time. The human female is like the biggest time waster in the animal kingdom. She's designed to make it maximally difficult for the male to know exactly when to have sex. And that's because in the course of the evolution of the human female, pretty much all external signs of ovulation have been concealed. So the male hasn't a clue what the right time is. And at the same time as ovulation has been concealed, her body is signaling that sex is possible. And in fact, the body language of the female means that the male actually finds her attractive. So the reason for we think the reason why the human female in the course of evolution did that is because she was increasingly needing more from the male than just sperm. So once the males were walking around on two legs with their hands free and can bring other stuff than sperm, I mean, obvious thing is food, maybe small animals, maybe other food, carrying it around, bringing it. If the female can get something from the male other than sperm, there's a difference between food and sperm. There's an important difference. With sperm, a little goes a long way. You hardly need any sperm to get pregnant with. And, once you're pregnant, you're 100% pregnant. With sperm, one male can provide, it's just as good to have like a bunch of females having sperm from one male, and probably better even than having sperm from 10 males, because you're going to get the best sperm. You're going to get the sperm from the dominant male. But as soon as you think about food, everything's changed. 10 males provide 10 times as much food, hunting, gathering, whatever, as one male. And so, the females in the group would increasingly need to avoid being monopolized by a dominant male. So it's like it's almost as if for the human female in the course of evolution, our motto was, if males are useful things to have, everyone should have at least one, and prevent being monopolized by a single male by phasing out those signals which enable the male to save time on sex. And then I can talk, and then there's another whole factor which probably Camilla will talk about, which is menstruation, which is extremely significant. Very significant. Again, it's such a taboo in our own culture that even scientists shy away from talking about it. So if you publish a book about menstruation, that people, even archaeologists, oh, no, we don't want to talk about that. It's an incredibly intimate, internalized taboo on menstruation. Much more of a taboo, by the way, than among hunters and gatherers. So among hunters and gatherers, menstruation is very important. It's the concept of taboo is inseparably connected with menstruation and blood. But hunter-gatherers are very happy to think about it and talk about it. It's very important to them. With us in the West, it's such an internalized taboo that you can hardly even mention it. And yet it's absolutely crucial to human evolution and origins and to religion. All religions, the ritual of, it isn't just Leviticus. It isn't just, religions of the book that go on about the blood of Jesus, the blood of the sacrificial animal. In all the world's religions, actually, when you're talking about the ritual system, you'll find blood, including menstrual blood, but not just menstrual blood of animals as well, at the core of the symbolism. So if you just exclude the topic of blood, you're really missing out the heart of the problem of the emergence of religion and ritual in human culture.
The centrality of blood, menstruation, the moon, red ochre. What is that all about?
Okay, well, Chris has explained the logic of women's sexual signaling. So a large part of the evidence is in women's bodies and how we have evolved sexual signals. Basically, we have evolved, as Chris says, to waste time and to level the reproductive success, the amount of opportunities for mating between men. Because if a monkey or a baboon or an ape has a sexual signal visible, then the dominant male is likely to monopolize and to be the only male with significant success. But if you hide ovulation and you have sexual receptivity like any time of the cycle, which is what women have, then it's impossible for one male to dominate, because whilst one male is paying attention to a female, other males are paying attention to other females. And the dominant male doesn't know when to leave. He doesn't know when that female's been fertile. Okay, but the trouble is that there is menstruation. Now, I could give a whole thing about the evolution of menstruation, but I'm not going to try and do that here. We evolved a very notably copious menstruation amongst the great apes. The great apes also menstruate. But because chimpanzees have a signal of estrus when they're fertile, that's what males are interested in. They're not interested that much in menstruation. But we don't have estrus. And therefore, menstruation becomes a very important cue for males to be able to tell the difference between which females are potentially fertile and which females are not, because they're not menstruating. They may be pregnant, or others who may be lactating. So if males have the choice amongst a range of women, like in a hunter-gatherer camp, of a menstrual female or a pregnant or a lactating, breastfeeding female, there's no question that a menstrual female is the one that a dominant male would try to target. Now, the big problem for females as the brain size gets bigger and bigger in the late stage of our evolution as African Homo sapiens is she needs males. If they're going to have sex with her, she needs them to be coming with goods, being useful, that they're helping and sharing their resources. That's the only way that she is getting such large-brained offspring up and running. So suppose there's a dominant male who wants to pick and choose amongst the females. Right, that's a menstruating female, so I'm gonna get to know her and take her off on safari, and I'm gonna keep hold of her until she's not menstruating anymore. But I'm not gonna offer her any support. So this idea that a male wants sex, but he's not going to offer the support, the investment, and that would be a kind of dominant male strategy. Well, this would be the absolute downfall for the evolution of our species. It just wouldn't have worked. Now, this may have happened with other hominins in, the last 500,000 years, but they weren't our ancestors. So something special happened, something revolutionary happened in the course of our ancestry. It's really a female problem. It's a female problem about how to organize, how to counter dominant males, how to reverse dominance. So I'm saying it is the kind of ultimate sort of expression of egalitarianism. And they need to join up. They need to have coalitions. They need to work together. And that means the females who are pregnant and lactating need to work with the females who are menstruating. Now, they're very likely to be relatives of each other, so this is not going to be a difficulty in cooperation as such. But the females who are the mothers, who need the most energy, what's their best strategy is with a menstruating female, that they can't, that's likely to be their relative. They can't just let that girl go to some male who wants to take her off in the bush. So we then have a situation where they're gonna surround that girl because she's menstruating. They're gonna guard her. They're gonna be signaling and making a hullabaloo, dancing. They're gonna be doing something which looks like, and really is, the prototype of the first menstrual ritual, the first ritual menstrual seclusion, which is a message saying to the male, you can't, pick and choose amongst us. You want any of us, you've got to work. Come, we're shut up shop now. It's no, until you come back with something useful, something that we can all, get our teeth into. So it really is the signal, this taboo signal is the basis of cooperation. It's a kind of strike, saying no to sex. It's a picket line. And on that picket line, this egalitarian consciousness is really born, this consciousness of symbolism, metaphor, taboo, the blood of the girl is made into the same symbolism as the blood of, is the same symbolically the blood of the game animal. And we have many of these hunter-gatherer rituals where some of the very oldest rituals that exist still to this day, where the girl is constructed as being a game animal, but she's completely unobtainable to the hunters. The message to the hunters is, okay, you go and get those game animals. But this girl, you can't touch her until you bring back those animals. And then we light the fires, and then we lift the blood, and then we can all eat together. So it is an essentially, shared concept. So the basis for gender solidarity amongst females then becomes the basis for gender solidarity amongst males. The dominant males, the whole ritual is set up against any attempt by a dominant male to grab a female. Menstruation is the essential symbolic basis for this. It's the moment where biology pivots into culture. It's like a fulcrum of the creation of culture. And so many hunter-gatherer concepts are linked into this taboo on menstruation in relation to hunting, in relation to the lunar cycle. And of course, the archaeological record for the entire period of the evolution of Homo sapiens from nearly 500,000 years ago, right through to the speciation of about 200,000 years ago. What is the earliest durable material that we find in the archaeological record, which is used, which is mined, which is searched for, which is curated, which is used for design? In the first place, it would have been design on bodies, but also design in actual carvings in ochre. Ochre is iron oxides, with red iron oxides, blood-coloured. Hematite is one of the geological terms. And this is pervasive in the archaeology of the African Stone Age, Middle Stone Age, and really provides us with a record of the earliest human art. So we call this theory, this model, female cosmetic coalitions, that females are appropriating cosmetics in durable substances like iron oxides to share and collectivize their signals in creating a picket line. I mean, this really is the earliest version of the red flag, if you like, hoisting the red flag to demonstrate collectivity and solidarity. And it just so happens from evolution that menstrual blood is the earliest form, the earliest dye, if you like, for this flag.
And what gave birth to this act of solidarity, of the sex strike, of the birth of culture, are maybe two happy facts, namely that the menstruational cycle with humans specifically is very much in concurrence with the moon cycle. And maybe not every listener is aware of this, is that there is a natural tendency of women to sync up their own cycle. So
yes, we can draw on these. I mean, very few scientists who've measured human females, we should be clear, have very variable cycle lengths. But if you are living a life, as obviously African Rift Valley hunter-gatherers are living a life where the lunar cycle dictates your rhythm of life in terms of when you can go hunting, when you dance, when you sing, just whether you have activity at night or not, as it does. So amongst the Hadza, the dark moon period is the period. The dark moon actually is the period of the maximum ritual activity, very important ritual activity. And it is the light of when the light of the moon is in the sky that men will want to go hunting. They have special techniques when at nighttime they can hunt. So yeah, we have an evolved cyclicity. We are fairly close to a lunar length. If we average lots of menstrual cycles of women in reproductive age, in their 20s particularly, that will go to, it's not actually 28, it's more like 29.5. So in your 20s, you're more likely to experience cycle lengths of that length. And yeah, chimpanzees, by contrast, have a 36-day cycle. They can't do lunar length. Whereas nearly every traditional culture around the world, we've forgotten about it, but nearly every traditional culture around the world will link women's cycle to the moon. And women will speak of the lunar cycle and their menstrual cycle in the same breath. It's just the same imagery, the same metaphors. So women are consciously linking themselves to the moon. The aspect of synchrony is another deep time. This would have been previous to symbolic culture, reproductive synchrony. Reproductive synchrony exists amongst a number of primate species, and it can be used as a sort of strategically it's almost a conscious strategy with some females of the primate species. But if you want to prevent dominant males from monopolizing, then females line up their fertile moments, but then a dominant male can't be with one fertile female and another. So they can quite subtly adjust. Females can adjust the ratios of males in their groups through this means. And human females, I just ask your women listeners out there who menstruate, have they got experience of some reproductive synchrony? It often happens actually under capitalism, there may be as much menstrual synchrony going on as almost ever in human history, because we tend to menstruate a lot because we have very short breastfeeding comparative to hunter-gatherers. So we're menstruating a lot of the time. And of course we're in close proximity in our work, in like offices and wherever we work, factories or whatever. And therefore, we would expect, to the extent that women have emotional solidarity, that they show reproductive synchrony as a feature. And that's undoubtedly a feature of our evolution.
All right. So maybe rounding it up, you're both part of the radical anthropology group. What does this group aim to do?
Well, we aim to organise a global insurrection and establish women's rule for a sufficient length of time to sort things out, because men have made a huge hash of things, and obviously under any regime which women had initiated, these time is money, patriarchy, clocks would have to be dispensed with, and we'd get back to slow time, using the sun and the moon, and these are the two clocks which have governed time over the whole history of life on Earth. And in fact, there wouldn't be any life on Earth without the moon, of course. Everyone knows that, or the sun. So yeah, that's the plan, is to organise the world revolution and get back to the communism that we evolved with, because that's we're human beings. We have a certain nature, a product of our evolutionary past, and we feel most relaxed and cheerful and healthy actually when we can laugh a lot. And it's very difficult to laugh if your boss is breathing down your neck, or it's very difficult to laugh actually if you're trying to control other people's behaviour. Laughter goes with equality, with being able to take the piss out of each other and not get too upset. And laughter is one of the special things that that distinguishes humans from other primates. Other primates, they play quite a lot, at least when they're young. But laughter is a very special medicine, if you like. And we need to be able to laugh a lot more. And you can't really laugh too much under capitalism, which is, the whole system is designed to make you anxious about where your next meal is coming from, whether you can pay the rent this month. And when everyone's anxious, you don't get a lot of laughter.
That actually brings me up to looking towards revolutionary moments in the last century or more. That every time we see, men have their playthings, they have their toys, but as soon as women get involved, things get serious regarding the revolution. And the most listeners will be, of course, be aware of the Russian Revolution, and the February Revolution started with women, I believe.
Every great revolution has been started by women, and unfortunately, they're ended by men. And when I say ended, that's usually literally true. The men take over, and that's kind of the end of it. And what's very important about the human revolution is that women had enough sense to know that having seized power, as we think they did, they also knew how to surrender power. Women weren't going to be boring. They weren't going to just take the power and just keep it and carry on in a linear, permanent state of being in charge of things. That's no fun for anyone. So what women did, and we can go back, over the material that Camilla was talking about, but what women did essentially was to seize power at dark moon by signaling no in a very powerful but joyful way in ritual. But at full moon, surrender to instincts, to sex, and in a sense to the male, because the male quite likes that. But only once the females have been absolutely convinced that okay, we've won this revolution once. We're not going to let the men take over for too long. Maybe 10 days, maybe at a stretch 2 weeks. But dark moon will be out on that picket line again. And so you have what Mona Finnegan talks. She described it as communism in motion. You have a pendulum. Women take over until full moon, men take over until dark moon, and you get this pendulum between women's power and male, and which, by the way, we still see in forest people today. A large part of that is reflected in, for example, the Bayaka, the Benjeli forest people of the Congo, where you have the women's ritual Ngoku, and you have the men's ritual Ijengi, and they're counterparts. It's like, women seize the power, but after a while it gets boring, so they let men take the power. That's quite fun for the women as well as the men, but it would be not very much fun if the men sort of hung on to power too long. And in too many societies, the men have seized power and kept it, and everything's gone very pear-shaped ever since that happened. So what I'm basically saying is, if we just have a thought experiment and imagine us, the organized revolutionary proletariat led by our sisters, just imagine that by some extraordinary miracle, and it would have to be a miracle, but then revolutions are always in a way miracles, aren't they? But they do happen from time to time. But if by some extraordinary miracle we gain the entire planet and seize power, I think it would still be necessary to surrender. But don't do that until we're sure that having won the revolution once, we can surrender and still win it again and again and again. So communism in motion would be the future, under the sun, but especially under the moon. And we call that, the words patriarchy, matriarchy are not quite satisfactory. They don't quite work, because the word matriarchy does, convey the idea of a sort of mirror image of patriarchy. So in our more humorous moments, we think of another term, and we tend to call it lunarchy, ruled by the moon.
Okay, so we've been at it for more than 50 minutes, and we've only barely scratched the surface on this whole topic. So should comrades be more interested in anthropology, in this whole topic, what resources can you recommend? Okay, well,
Sarah Hurdy's Mothers and Others is a fantastic basic introduction to the evolution of our species. Chris Knight's great classic work, I have to say, Blood Relations, Menstruation and the Origins of Culture, is just a wonderful read. There are, up on the Radical Anthropology group, there's quite a collection of more recent published articles, because Chris's great book, Blood Relations, is back in the 1990s, and particularly with our colleague Ian Watts and a number of writings with him and with Jerome Lewis. We've done a lot of recent update on the whole question of the evolution of language, the evolution of ritual, the evolution of art, particularly the Red Ochre record, because Ian Watts is a great expert on all that. So I'd look to the Radical Anthropology Group website, which is quite easy to find, to point out some more recent articles if you want them.
All right, and thank you for your time. Dit was het weer voor deze week. Volgende week hebben we een uitgebreid interview met oud-Europarlementariër voor de SP, Erik Meijer, over zijn tijd in Europa, zijn kijk over hoe we er als SP in staan en wat er verder nodig is om stappen vooruit te maken op continentaal niveau.